there was a recognition that religion was going to play a vital role in a larger system of political self-government. So the last thing that the founding generation wanted to discourage was a role for religion in civic life, a role for religion in public life more generally.
It's hard to find any founder. There might be one or two, a few outliers, if you will, like Thomas Paine later, who are unfriendly to religion. They're deeply friendly to the role that religion plays as a practical matter in a republic. Many of them, a strong majority, are not only interested in its practical role, but in its deeper moral role, because they themselves were deeply shaped by their own faith.
Since its 1947 decision in Everson versus Board of Education, the U.S. Supreme Court has taken our nation in a completely new direction when it comes to the public expression of religion. In Everson, the High Court erected for the first time a wall of separation between church and state, making that principle the new measuring stick for questions regarding religion in the public sphere. Following the Everson decision, ruling after ruling eradicated the practices in which Americans had engaged since its earliest years. Public school systems especially became a battleground over the issue of religious expression.
I think the increasingly limited and restricted role that the civil state allows religion to play would have been very alarming to the founding generation, because they would have, I think, quite rightly feared that it would have undermined the opportunities and potential for a system of self-government to survive.
Without question, in today's society, in the United States, we have a clear movement, a clear thrust, and throughout our society, to no longer make us a Judeo-Christian-based nation, but to secularize us.
Examples of this process of restricting religious expression abound, from the elimination of nativity scenes on the town square at Christmas to lawsuits trying to remove the words "under God" from the Pledge of Allegiance. Secularists seem determined to push religion into the closet.
We're back. Thanks so much for sticking around. What a fascinating conversation we're having. Ed Vitagliano in studio with me today, and we're talking about where our nation is and how we have moved away from God and, gotten so far away from our foundation. And before we went to break, I was asking the question, how can we know that when our founding fathers talked about God and talked about morality and religion in our nation, that they were talking about the God of the Bible?
Well, we do address this in the documentary, and I want to say, just from a historical perspective, not every one of our founders was on the same theological page.
Okay.
But the great majority of these men who founded our nation, and you're talking about those who founded the colonies, the documents that are pre-Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, obviously the Constitution. The majority of them were Christian.
Okay.
And we do ask the question in the documentary, when Thomas Jefferson, for example, says in the Declaration of Independence that all men are created equal and they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. When Jefferson also in that paragraph references the laws of nature and nature's God.
Yeah.
We ask the question, well, is it fair to ask to whom they're referring? Is it Allah? Is it Buddha? Is it one of the millions of gods in Hinduism? Or is it to whom it may concern? Is it just some generic whatever, whoever's out there, whatever? And the answer to that is no, that it is clearly coming from Western civilization and coming to this new world. They brought a Judeo-Christian understanding of the world. Now, that's not just my opinion, that is the opinion of the experts that we interviewed. I do understand the fact that our country has become more pluralistic religiously, but that doesn't change the fact that when they speak of nature and nature's God, and they talk about all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator, they are coming from a Judeo-Christian mindset.
Yeah.
So understanding that we want to have religious freedom for all people of all different faiths, as one of our interviewees, Robert George from Princeton University, says, even people of no faith if we want to protect those freedoms, we must return to the principles, the founding principles, and you cannot strip away the God of the Bible from our founding fathers. Even though a couple of them were atheists, not all of them were what we would consider, Bible-believing Christians. You still have to come to the understanding that they saw from a Judeo-Christian perspective the importance of that religious heritage to the nation's founding. Here's an easy way of saying, well, it can't be Allah, because first of all, none of them were Muslims, but Islam, in my opinion, is incompatible, at least at this stage of Islam's history, is incompatible with a democratic view. Because you cannot have freedom of religion in a Muslim country.
That makes sense.
So Saudi Arabia, for example, it is illegal to have a church. You can't have a Bible out in public. This is in the year 2012. So how would a republic function on that foundation? Well, it can't. And so if you're going to have religion and morality being indispensable supports, as George Washington said, it has to be from the Western perspective, the Judeo-Christian perspective, and that is the God of the Bible.
Why can't we have morality without religion, Ed? For example, why can't we have a moral atheist and have them be a part of government and making up, is that possible?
Well, it's certainly possible to be a moral person and not be a Christian. It's possible to be an atheist and not be a moral, it's possible to be an atheist and a moral person. But at some point, when push comes to shove, morality has to be rooted in something if you're making grand decisions about the direction of your country. And so, in my opinion, and I think we present this clearly from our interviews, what is it that morality is going to be rooted in when you talk about unalienable rights, for example? Can an atheist look at the Declaration of Independence and the statement that all men are created equal and they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights? Can an atheist agree with that statement? Well, an atheist can't, because he doesn't believe there's a Creator. Well, then where do our rights come from? If they don't come from God, and therefore they are unalienable, you can't take them away, then who grants rights? Then you have to say government. Men grant rights. And if men grant rights, and this is all spelled out in our interviews, if men grant rights, men can take rights away. But if rights come from God, and a government's job is to protect those unalienable rights, then you cannot decouple the culture from God. Otherwise, you lose the source of those rights. We do, by the way, in this documentary, we are putting together some extras, 5 segments. Every DVD has some extras. We won't have bloopers, but we will have some of these interviews. We do deal with these issues, natural law. We deal with where rights come from, because we had so much good stuff from these interviews.
You really did.
Yeah.
You really did. And I wanted more. And I'll just say again, I don't know if I've said already, but the DVD is available. We're just showing clips here. But if you want to really get an understanding, you'll want to watch it in its entirety, and you can get it by going online, store.afa.net. That's store.afa.net. And the documentary is called Divorcing God. And I've heard the argument that Christians are on a slippery slope when we start trying to force our way back into the public square, when we say, no, we don't want Muslims to be able to, have holidays recognized and all of these things, that we want to have a Christian America. And I've heard people say, we've got to be careful about, what we're saying and what we're demanding. What do you think about that?
Well, I understand the impulse to say, well, everybody's religion is important to them, and people who are atheists, their non-belief is important to them. But at some point, a culture has to say, all right, that's fine. Everybody's free to do what they want to do, but what are we going to anchor this republic in? And that's the argument we're having right now, because there are people who are saying, well, we don't have to anchor it in religion and morality. As George Washington said, we can change that. We can anchor it in nothing. We can anchor it in secularism. And my firm belief is that at some point, when push comes to shove, you've got to be able to say, we have to have a foundation. Every building has a foundation. In fact, Benjamin Franklin, who was not necessarily a Bible-believing Christian, as this Constitutional Convention is unfolding, Benjamin Franklin stands up because they were deadlocked for 5 weeks and couldn't make certain concessions. Benjamin Franklin stands up, about probably as close to a deist as we had amongst our founding fathers. He stands up and says something very un-deist-like. He says, look, gentlemen, he says, the sacred writings, referring to the Bible, the sacred writings say, unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it. And he said, if God is aware when a sparrow falls to the ground, again citing the Bible,
yes,
is it probable that a nation or an empire can arise without his aid? And he calls for prayer. Now, you say, well, he's a deist. Well, a deist doesn't believe in prayer and doesn't believe that God is sovereign over the rise and fall of nations. He calls for prayer because he understands that you have to have a foundation for a house to be built, and God has to help people build that house, talking about our nation.
Yeah.
So when push comes to shove, we have got to be able to say, at the end of the day, our nation is founded on the Judeo-Christian worldview and the Judeo-Christian faith. And while the house that is built upon that can allow people to worship as they see fit, true freedom of religion, everybody who does that has to recognize this is the foundation of the nation. And if you detach it, if you detach the house from the foundation, it falls.
Yeah.
And we are seeing the process of the nation falling, I believe, at least decaying. You're feeling it shudder. And if we don't return the nation to its proper moral and religious foundations, we will not survive, because that's what even secular historians and sociologists and anthropologists tell us.
Yeah.
And that's certainly what Scripture tells us.
A lot of us wonder, Ed, in America, we say, kind of like, the chicken, oh, the sky's falling, but we say, how did we get here? How did this happen? In the documentary, you talk about, is it the Everson Supreme Court decision, 1947?
Yes, Everson versus Walls, 1947.
Yeah. Talk about that a little bit. And was that the beginning of the decline in America?
That was a Supreme Court decision in 1947, and we refer to a handful, half a dozen or so, very important Supreme Court decisions.
Yes.
But that was the first one to use the Jeffersonian phrase from Thomas Jefferson, separation of a wall of separation between church and state. Now, for those who pay attention, who listen to David Barton or who listen to American Family Radio, they understand, but a lot of people don't understand, that the phrase that Thomas Jefferson used was written in a letter to the Baptist Association of Danbury, Connecticut, who were worried that the government would begin to choose between religions, between versions of Christianity, and that some would be advantaged and some would be disadvantaged. Thomas Jefferson says, no, there must be a wall of separation between church and state. The state cannot impose its views on churches. What the Everson decision did, the Supreme Court took that phrase and flipped it on its head and said church and state must be separate, and they set us on a path to making a secular nation, when that's not at all what Jefferson, I believe, and many experts believe, that is not at all what Thomas Jefferson was saying. Thomas Jefferson, who, when he was president, had the Congress pay money to send missionaries to Native Americans.
Wow.
Government money. So he obviously didn't believe the way the Supreme Court used his phrase in 1947.
Ed, we're out of time, but I want to give you the last words. I want you to give an encouragement to Christians watching as far as where we are today and what God requires of believers who are on the front lines of this battle.
I would say this. I would say, here's the good news. Christians should do what Christians have always done for 2,000 years. They should be salt and light. They should follow Jesus Christ. They should speak forth the word of truth. But there's an additional requirement now, and that is they must be informed and they must be active in politics and be bold enough to speak the truth, even if they're mocked.
Oh, we've run out of time. I'm glad that you're doing more. You're going to do a follow-up. But again, the documentary is called Divorcing God, and it's available online, store.afa.net. Ed Vitagliano has been my guest today, and we've been talking about what's going on in the culture. Ed, thank you so much.
Absolutely. It's been
what
my
a great
pleasure,
time.
Meeke. Thank you.
And so I humbly call on you to say, if not me, then who? If not now, then when? If not this way of making a difference, then what? This is, as Ronald Reagan once said, the last stand for freedom. If it doesn't work here, it's going to disappear from the earth. I love those words that are so powerfully given to us, that it has been entrusted into your hands, you the American people, the sacred fire of liberty, this experiment in the Republican form of government. George Washington speaking to us. What are you going to do with this experiment? Is it going to fall because of you? Or are you going to make a difference? Today's the day.